The desert night breathed cold against the earth. Stars burned like scattered embers above a world made of silence and dust. A lone cowboy rode through it. His name was Colt Merrick. He was a man carved from the road. Weary eyes, cracked hands, and a heart that no longer trusted peace. The wind scraped against the rocks as he passed, whispering like something alive. He left behind the border towns, their whiskey and gun smoke fading into memory. Out here, there was only the rhythm of hooves and the soft rattle of his saddle. He rode not by choice, but because fate had left him nowhere else to go. The moon hung low, casting the land in ghostly silver. Every cactus shadow looked like a man waiting with a gun. The air tasted of sand and iron. Somewhere far off, coyotes began to cry, sharp and lonely. Colt adjusted his hat against the wind and muttered under his breath, "Ain't much left worth following." His horse snorted, tired but loyal. They moved on through a canyon whose walls rose like the ribs of some dead giant. That was when he heard it. A cry. "Hi, human!" terrified. He froze. The sound tore through the night again, mixed with splashing water and savage snarls. Without thinking, Colt kicked his horse into a gallop. Dust exploded beneath the hooves. The canyon walls blurred as he raced toward the sound. Then the world opened into a narrow stream cutting across the canyon floor. The moonlight painted the water silver, and in that trembling light, he saw them. 6 wolves, lean and desperate, their eyes burning red. In the center stood a young woman, waist-deep in the current, holding a broken spear. For one heartbeat, everything slowed. Then the first wolf leapt. Colt drew and fired. The gun cracked like thunder. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. One beast fell, its yelp swallowed by the canyon's echo. The others turned, teeth flashing. Colt fired again. And again. His horse reared, hooves slashing through air. He shouted, "Back, damn you!" The echo of his voice rolled off the canyon walls. The wolves hesitated, snarling at the scent of blood and fire, then scattered into the dark. Silence rushed back, heavy and hollow. Colt dismounted, boots sinking into the wet sand. The girl was trembling, clutching her arm where blood seeped through her fingers. Her black hair clung to her face, soaked and tangled. The stream carried away the red in slow ribbons. Colt knelt beside her. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low, unsure. The words felt strange, a kindness he hadn't spoken in years. She looked up at him. Even through the fear, there was strength in her gaze, a fierce light that refused to die. For a moment, neither moved. The desert held its breath. Then, slowly, she took his offered hand. Her grip was firm, her skin cold from the water. He pulled her gently to her feet. The wind stirred, carrying the smell of rain and dust. And something else, a sound, deep, rhythmic, growing louder. Drums. They echoed faintly through the canyon, pulsing like the heartbeat of the earth. Colt turned toward the sound, his eyes narrowing. The girl's breath caught. She whispered something in her tongue, a warning or a prayer. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the fear. The rhythm came closer, rolling through the night air. Colt's hand felt the grip of his revolver as the girl whispered one word he did know, Apache. He froze, the sound of drums growing louder. And for the first time that night, Colt wondered if saving her had just signed his death. The desert swallowed sound like a grave swallow's breath. Colt stood still, his chest heaving as the echoes of gunfire faded into the night. The girl beside him trembled, clutching her wounded arm. The faint rhythm of the drums rolled through the canyon again, slow, steady, and growing closer. His eyes swept the darkness, tracing the jagged cliffs and shifting shadows. The air was heavy with dust and the smell of spent gunpowder. "You from a village nearby?" he asked quietly. The woman didn't answer. Her gaze was locked on the mouth of the canyon where the echoes came from. Her lips moved softly, almost in prayer. Colt felt his heartbeat slow, the silence between each drumbeat tightening around them. His horse stamped nervously, snorting into the wind. He reached for the reins, his fingers brushing the revolver at his side. "We best move before they come looking," he muttered, more to himself than to her. She hesitated, then nodded. Her eyes darted toward the distant cliffs, where faint torchlight flickered, small, moving points like fireflies in the dark. Colt lifted her onto the horse, then mounted behind. He felt the tremor in her body as he clicked his tongue and steered the horse through the canyon's shadowed ribs. The hooves struck stone and sand in uneven rhythm, echoing softly. Behind them, the drums grew louder, not many, but enough to tell him they were close. The moon slid behind a cloud, and the canyon darkened into a tunnel of silver mist. They rode for miles without a word. The land stretched endless and empty, rocks sharp as blades, sand whispering under the hooves, stars flickering cold above them. The girl's breathing steadied. Her weight leaned slightly against him. She smelled of smoke and earth and river water. Somewhere between the silence and the ride, Colt realized how long had been since he'd felt another heartbeat near his own. The thought unsettled him. He'd saved lives before, but never one that looked at him the way she had, with equal parts fear and defiance. By dawn, the sky bruised purple and red. The wind picked up sharp and dry. Colt found a small hollow beneath an overhang of rock and guided the horse in. He helped her down and tore a strip from his coat to wrap her arm. She winced but didn't cry. "You talk much?" he asked, forcing a smile. She stared at him blankly for a moment, then spoke in halting English. "You saved me. Why?" Colt looked away, squinting into the light creeping over the desert. "Didn't have time to think about it," he said. "Guess it just seemed the right thing." She studied him quietly, her dark eyes deep and unreadable. "My people, they will come," she whispered. He poured a small measure of water into his hand and offered it to her. The gesture was awkward, but she took it, sipping slowly. The rising sun turned the desert into fire, dunes glowing gold, the sky blazing above the red cliffs. For a brief, fragile moment, it felt peaceful. But then, from beyond the ridge, came the echo of a distant call. Not drums now, but the sharp cry of a horn. Colt's hand went instinctively to his gun. The girl froze. The sound came again, closer this time, bouncing off the canyon walls. She turned toward him, her voice barely a whisper. "They found us." Colt stood slowly, dust rising around his boots, eyes narrowing as he looked out into the vast horizon. His jaw tightened. "Then I reckon we don't have much time." He glanced at her once more, this stranger who had already tangled his fate with hers, and then at the sky blazing like a warning. The wind howled through the rocks, carrying the sound of riders approaching. Somewhere in that endless desert, the hunt had begun again. The morning burned across the desert like a forge. The sun rose fierce and red, painting the cliffs with fire. Colt led the horse through the maze of canyons, guiding the girl close behind him on foot. The wind had changed. It carried the scent of smoke and something else he knew too well: pursuit. He didn't speak, and she didn't ask. The only sounds were the shuffle of boots on stone and the dry rasp of wind slipping between the rocks. Every few steps, Colt would glance back, his eyes sharp, scanning the ridges. Somewhere back there, he knew, the riders were closing in, her people, angry and fast. The girl stumbled once, catching herself on the wall, her breath ragged. He stopped, handed her the canteen. She drank, then handed it back without a word. The silence between them felt heavier than the sun. They moved through a narrow ravine where the rock walls pressed close, swallowing the light. The air smelled of dust and old rain. Colt's hand never strayed far from his gun. His instincts were honed from years of running, from men who wanted him dead, and ghosts that wouldn't quit chasing. "You got a name?" he asked at last, breaking the silence. She hesitated, her voice soft, almost shy. "Naya." The sound of it hung between them like a secret. He nodded once. "I'm Colt." That was all. They kept walking. The ravine opened suddenly into a stretch of cracked earth. The horizon shimmered with heat, and far beyond it, faint shapes moved, riders, dark against the morning light. Naya saw them first. "They come," she whispered. Colt's jaw tightened. "Yeah, I see 'em." He scanned the land, nowhere to hide but a few scattered boulders and a dying tree. He led her toward the rocks, crouching low. The riders drew closer, 7, maybe 8. Their horses kicked up clouds of dust. Spears glinted in the sun. Colt could hear the faint thud of hooves echoing through the ground. The air trembled with it. He checked his revolver. 6 bullets left. Not enough if they surrounded them. He took a slow breath, steadying his hands. "If they mean to fight, stay behind me," he said. Naya shook her head fiercely. "No, you saved me. They see me with you. They think you steal me. You die." Colt looked at her, seeing the fear in her eyes, but also something else, loyalty, fierce and sudden. "Then what do you suggest?" he asked. Her gaze flicked toward the ridge. "We go high. They not climb fast." Colt nodded once. "Then move." They scrambled up the rocks, boots sliding on the sand-slick stone. Below, the riders shouted, angry voices in Apache tongue. Arrows hissed past, biting into the dirt. Colt ducked low, grabbing Naya's arm as she slipped. "Keep climbing," he barked. The heat pressed against him like a living thing. Dust filled his throat. When they reached the top, Colt turned, fired once, twice. The shots cracked across the canyon, echoing like thunder. One horse stumbled. The riders scattered, regrouping. Colt holstered his gun, breathing hard. "That'll slow 'em," he muttered. They reached a ridge overlooking miles of wasteland, an ocean of gold and red. The sun was merciless, burning their shadows long and thin. Naya sank to her knees, exhausted. Colt stood still, scanning the endless horizon. "Ain't no safety out here," he said quietly. "Nowhere at all." The wind picked up, scattering sand around them. Naya looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "You saved me," she said again. "Now I save you." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She pointed toward the far side of the ridge, where faint smoke rose in the distance. "My mother's place," she said. "They won't harm you there." Colt hesitated. The girl had already cost him his peace, maybe soon his life. Yet something in her voice, the fragile hope of it, made him nod. "Lead the way, Naya," he said softly. But behind them, down the canyon, the riders had found their trail again. Their shouts carried to the wind, sharp, vengeful, echoing like war cries. Colt turned once more toward the horizon, knowing this desert wasn't through with him yet. By midday, the sun hung high like a blade of fire, carving the world into light and shadow. Colt and Naya moved fast across the ridge, their steps crunching through gravel and dry brush. The air shimmered with heat. Every breath burned the lungs. Behind them, the sound of pursuit faded for a while, but Colt knew it wasn't gone, just waiting. He'd spent too many years being hunted not to recognize the rhythm of a chase. His hat brim shaded his eyes, but sweat trickled down his face, gathering dust. Naya moved with silent grace despite her wound, her eyes fixed on the far-off smoke that rose beyond the horizon. "Your mother's place," Colt said, his voice rough from thirst. "How far?" She didn't look back. "Half a day's walk, if the spirits are kind." He gave a short, humorless chuckle. "Ain't met a kind spirit out here yet." The land around them began to change, less rock, more sand, and scattered cacti that reached the sky like desperate hands. A hawk circled overhead, its cries slicing through the dry air. They found a patch of shade beneath a large boulder and stopped to rest. Colt handed her the last of the water. She tried to give it back, but he shook his head. "Keep it. You'll need it more than me." She hesitated, then drank slowly, her dark eyes flicking toward him with something that almost looked like gratitude. "You have no tribe," she said softly. Colt's jaw tightened. "Had one once. Lost it a long time ago." The words hung heavy between them. She studied him for a moment. "Then you wander," she said. "Yes," he replied, "and wandering don't bring much peace." The wind shifted suddenly, carrying the faint sound of a horse's whinny. Colt's hand went to his gun. He rose to his feet, scanning the ridge behind them. A flash of movement caught his eye. Sunlight on metal, the glint of a rifle barrel. "Down!" he barked, grabbing Naya and pulling her behind the rock as a shot rang out. The bullet sparked against the stone, sending chips flying. Another shot followed, closer this time. Colt peered over the edge, spotting 3 riders approaching fast. The others must have split off, circling them. "They're not giving up," he muttered. He aimed carefully, fired once, and one of the riders dropped. The others ducked, returning fire. The canyon roared with echoes of gunfire and shouts in Apache tongue. Dust swirled around them, stinging eyes and throats. Naya crouched low, clutching her arm. "No more bullets?" she asked. Colt checked the chamber. 2 left, enough to make him think twice. He waited, steady, patient. When the next rider appeared over the ridge, Colt fired again. The man fell from his horse, rolling down the slope. The last rider hesitated, then turned back, vanishing into the haze. Silence fell again, heavy and sharp. Colt lowered his gun, breathing hard. The air smelled of smoke and blood. Naya looked at him, her voice trembling. "You killed them?" "Didn't have much choice," he said quietly. They stayed hidden until the sun began to sink, the sky turning molten gold. Colt gathered the fallen horse's reins, his movements slow and tired. He found a canteen half full and handed it to Naya. "We ride the rest of the way," he said. She nodded, climbing onto one of the horses with practiced ease. As they set off toward the horizon, the desert stretched endless and silent around them. The sun fell lower, its light spilling across the sand like blood. For a brief moment, Colt thought maybe they'd outrun death for the day. But just as the first stars began to appear, a sound rose in the distance, the cry of a war horn, echoing across the plain. It was closer than before. Colt's stomach turned cold. He met Naya's gaze. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. They both knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The sun fell behind the mountains, dragging the light with it until only the deep bruised blue of twilight remained. The desert cooled, and the wind turned sharp. Colt and Naya rode hard to the gathering darkness, their horses kicking dust that shimmered like ghost fire in the moonlight. Neither spoke. The war horn still echoed faintly behind them, a haunting reminder that the chase had not ended. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of dry grass whispered danger. Colt's eyes swept the horizon, searching for cover. "You sure this place of yours exists?" he muttered. Naya didn't turn. "Yes, hidden. Only my mother and I know the way." The way she said it made him uneasy, as if the desert itself guarded her secret. They rode until the moon was high, its silver light washing the world in silence. The land changed again, the sand giving way to rocky ground, the kind that broke horseshoes and cut boots. A single tree stood ahead, gnarled and black against the stars. Beyond it, a faint orange glow flickered. Firelight. Naya straightened, eyes brightening. "There," she whispered. "My home." Colt slowed the horse, wary. The firelight came from a hollow in the rocks, a narrow pass leading into a hidden valley. As they entered, the wind stilled and the air grew warmer. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney. A small cabin sat at the base of a cliff, half hidden by desert vines and brush. It was the first sign of life Colt had seen in miles. An old woman stepped out from the doorway, her hair silver, her eyes dark as a canyon. She wore beads around her neck and a knife at her belt. When she saw Naya, her lips parted in surprise, then relief. "Naya," she said softly, her voice cracked by years and sand. The girl slid off her horse and ran to her, speaking quickly in Apache. The woman's gaze shifted to Colt. It was not a friendly look. She said something sharp in her tongue. Naya answered, shaking her head, pointing at him, then at her bandaged arm. The old woman's expression changed, not softer, but curious. She nodded once, slowly. Colt removed his hat, respectful. "Ma'am," he said. She said nothing, just studied him like a hawk watching a coyote. Then she gestured toward the fire. "Come," Naya translated. "You eat." Colt hesitated only a moment before following. The warmth hit him like a wave, the scent of smoke, corn, and something cooking in an iron pot. It had been weeks since he'd smelled food that wasn't jerky or dust. He sat near the fire, the crackling sound filling the hollow silence. The woman stirred the pot without a word, her eyes flicking to him every so often. Naya sat beside him, her arm freshly wrapped. "My mother says you are foolish," she murmured. "Maybe," he said, "but foolishness saved your life." That made her smile, the first he'd seen. It was small, but it softened her face. Outside, the coyotes began to sing to the moon. The firelight danced across Colt's face, bringing out the lines of weariness carved deep over years of wandering. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe. The desert, for all its cruelty, had offered him one quiet night. But peace never lasted long for men like him. As Naya's mother served them, Colt noticed something in her eyes, not gratitude, but sorrow. When he finally spoke, she only said one thing in English, her voice low and cold. "You saved my daughter. Now she yours." Colt froze, his spoon halfway to his mouth. "What did she say?" he asked. Naya looked at the fire, her face unreadable. "She says you belong to me now." The words hung heavy between them. Outside, the wind picked up, carried with a far-off echo. The sound of horses once again. The fire burned low, and the desert night grew colder. Colt couldn't shake the weight of those words. "You belong to me now." They echoed in his chest like a rattle in a dry well. Across the fire, Naya sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the flames. Her mother had gone inside the cabin, leaving them under the ghostly sky, where the stars looked sharp enough to cut. Colt's mind spun. He'd been called many things, drifter, outlaw, loner, but never someone's man. He shifted, staring into the embers. "You don't really believe what she said, do you?" he muttered. Naya's voice was soft, almost lost in the wind. "In our way, saving a life means tying it to yours. It is not about owning, it is about debt. Spirit for spirit." Colt let out a dry laugh. "Spirit debt, huh? Never heard that in Texas." "Then you've never known Apache ways," she said, her tone edged but calm. The silence between them thickened, broken only by the hiss of the fire. Then a faint tremor rolled through the ground. Hooves. Distant, but coming closer. Colt rose instantly, every muscle tightening. "They found us," he whispered. Naya jumped up, her eyes wide. Her mother rushed out from the cabin, her face pale even in the orange glow. "We cannot fight them here," Naya said quickly. Colt grabbed his rifle, checking the chamber. "Then we ride." The old woman spoke rapidly in Apache, thrusting a leather satchel into her daughter's hands. "She says go." Naya translated. "She will stay and mislead them." Colt frowned. "She'll get herself killed." The woman met his eyes, and for the first time, he saw strength that matched his own. "Her life already belongs to the land," Naya said. "Now we must move." They mounted their horses and slipped into the darkness, the moon guiding their path. Behind them, the valley glowed faintly, smoke curling, a shadow of fire beginning to rise. Colt didn't look back. The sound of pursuit grew louder. Apache riders, at least half a dozen, shouting to each other across the wind. Bullets cracked through the night, one whizzing past Colt's shoulder. He kicked his horse harder, the animal's hooves thundering against rock. "Hold tight," he shouted. The canyon opened ahead, and they plunged into it, dust exploding around them. The echoes of their flight bounced off the stone walls, making it sound like an army was running with them. Then the river, a dark ribbon glinting under moonlight. Colt pulled the reins and veered sharply, the horse splashing into shallow water. The cold cut through him, but the noise of the stream would cover their tracks. They rode upstream until the gunfire faded into the distance. When they finally stopped, both horses were trembling, sides heaving. The moon hung low, painting the canyon silver. Colt slid off his horse, breathless, soaked to the bone. Naya dismounted, clutching the satchel close to her chest. She opened it. Inside were herbs, flint, and a small carved figure. Her fingers brushed it reverently. "My mother's spirit charm," she whispered. Colt sank onto a rock, staring up at the vast sky. The silence after the chase was deafening. The desert stretched around them, endless and alive. For the first time, he saw the fear fade from Naya's face, replaced by something fiercer, resolve. "You saved me again," she said quietly. He smiled tiredly. "Guess we're even now." She shook her head. "Not yet. You still owe the spirits their due." Her voice was steady, almost prophetic. He didn't know whether to laugh or shiver. Then, far behind them, the glow of fire rose higher, spreading across the valley where her home had been. The flames painted the horizon red. Naya stood, her face lit by it, and whispered something Colt didn't understand. But the way she said it made him feel the weight of loss and destiny all at once. The night had taken one home, but it bound two souls tighter than before. By dawn, the river had turned to mist, curling around Colt and Naya like a living spirit. The air was heavy with silence, the kind that comes after fire, after loss. Colt stood on the edge of the cliff, his clothes torn and soaked, staring at the desert that stretched forever in every direction. The land was empty, yet it watched him, breathing through the whisper of wind and the rustle of dry grass. Behind him, Naya attended to the horses, her movements deliberate, graceful even in exhaustion. "We can't go back," she said softly, without looking up. "They'll hunt until blood pays for blood." Colt turned, his face shadowed under the brim of his hat. "Then we keep moving. Somewhere they can't track us." She lifted her gaze to him, the dawn light catching her eyes, brown but fierce with amber sparks. "There's nowhere they can't track," she said. "Not in their land." The sun crept higher, bleeding red through the thin veil of morning dust. They rode in silence, the desert swallowing the sound of hooves. Hours passed until the heat began to shimmer off the rocks, and a faint outline of a butte appeared ahead, tall, jagged, crowned with dead trees. "Red Mesa," Naya said. "A place of trials." Colt narrowed his eyes. "Trials for what?" "For those who need the Spirit's mercy," she replied. Her tone was distant, haunted. When they reached the base, Naya dismounted and pressed her palm to stone, whispering words he didn't understand. The air shifted. Even Colt, who had long stopped believing in anything but bullets and survival, felt something move around them. A pulse, ancient and alive. They climbed to a small plateau where a natural arch framed the horizon. From there, they could see smoke pillars rising far off, riders still searching. Colt dropped his pack, his breath ragged. "If they find us here," he began, but Naya interrupted, her voice calm. "They won't. Not tonight. Tonight, the blood moon rises." He looked up, and there it was, faint and pale now, but growing darker with every passing minute. The sun had barely set, and already the moon had a copper tint. "What's that supposed to mean?" Colt asked. Naya knelt by a circle of stones, pulling out her mother's charm. "It means the spirits are watching," she said, lighting a small fire, "and they will decide if you belong to me or to death." Colt frowned, half in disbelief. "You still believe in that?" "Belief isn't a choice," she said, eyes fixed on the flame. "It's blood." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of smoke and desert sage. Shadows lengthened as the red moon climbed. Colt felt something stir deep inside him, not fear, but unease, like the earth itself was holding its breath. The air was too still, the night too alive. Then a low sound drifted up the canyon. A drumbeat, slow, measured, growing louder. Colt froze. "They found us," he whispered. But Naya shook her head, her voice barely a breath. "No, those aren't men's drums." The sound rolled through the cliffs, and the fire flared suddenly, burning with an unnatural blue light. Colt stepped back, reaching for his gun, though he didn't know why. The flames danced, twisting into shapes, wolves, horses, faces that flickered and vanished. The drum beats blended with the wind until the whole mesa throbbed with rhythm. Then Naya stood, her face bathed in red light, her expression unreadable. "You saved me from the wolves," she said quietly. "Now the spirits want to know why." Colt opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. He had no reason, or too many. The wind roared, scattering ash into the sky. The blood moon was full now, and its light turned everything to copper and shadow. The night deepened until the world was nothing but shadow and fire. The drums had faded, but their rhythm still echoed in Colt's bones. The blue flame flickered low, whispering like breath through the stones. Naya stood in its light, her eyes reflecting the strange glow, her face unreadable, half angel, half omen. Colt's pulse thundered in his ears. "What do the spirits want with me?" he asked, his voice hoarse, the sound swallowed by the wind. Naya didn't answer. Instead, she took the small carved charm from her hand and held it toward the fire. "They want truth," she said, and they will have it. The charm caught the light, gleaming like bone. Then she dropped it into the flame. It hissed and cracked, and the fire surged upward, blazing gold and red. Colt shielded his eyes, but when he looked again, he saw a vision swirling in the smoke. Faces from his past, memories he'd buried deep. The burning town, the dying men, the woman he couldn't save. Every sin he'd tried to forget rose before him in smoke and ash. He staggered back, choking. "Stop this," he shouted, but the fire only grew brighter. Naya's voice came through the roar, steady and low. "They see your heart. They see your fear." The flames twisted, showing her now. Not Naya, but a ghostly reflection, eyes like stars, hair flowing with the wind. "They ask why you fight for a stranger when you would not fight for yourself." Colt's breath caught. He wanted to speak, to curse, to deny, but the truth clawed at his throat. Because he stopped, the fire's glow carved lines of pain across his face. "Because I couldn't save the last one." The wind howled through the canyon like a cry of release, and suddenly the fire snapped shut, collapsing into smoke and silence. Naya dropped to her knees, trembling, her body outlined in the dying light. Colt rushed to her side, catching her before she fell. "Naya," he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open, her voice barely a whisper. "It's done. They heard you." The world around them was still, eerily still. The blood moon hung above, huge and swollen, painting the rocks red. Colt felt drained, hollowed out, like the fire had burned straight through him. He looked at her, the woman who had dragged him back into something he'd long forgotten, belief. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then Naya lifted her gaze to the horizon. Smoke still lingered far off, but between them and that ruin stretched only desert and silence. "They will come again," she said softly. "My people do not forgive easily." Colt nodded, his jaw tight. "Then we'll be ready." She turned to him, and for the first time, her expression softened, not with gratitude, but something deeper. "You don't understand," she said. "If they find us, I must choose between you and them." The words hung in the air, heavy as thunder. Colt didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was already written in the way she looked at him, torn between duty and the fire that had begun to burn quietly between them. The blood moon dipped lower, bleeding into the horizon. As the last of the light faded, Colt stood, staring at the desert below, knowing the peace wouldn't last. Somewhere in the darkness, a single drumbeat sounded again, slow, distant, but coming closer. Naya turned her face away, hiding the fear in her eyes. Colt's hand brushed the revolver at his side. "Then let them come," he said quietly, though a tremor hid beneath his calm. The desert wind carried his words away, scattering them into the endless night. The dawn that followed was not peaceful. It bled across the desert like a wound reopening, staining the sky in shades of rust and gold. Colt and Naya stood at the edge of Red Mesa, watching the horizon where the smoke had finally vanished. The world looked clean again, but they both knew it was only pretending. The wind had changed, sharper, carrying the scent of horse sweat and dust from far away. Riders were coming. Colt tightened his saddle straps, his jaw set. He'd been chased before, but this felt different. It wasn't just his life on the line. It was something heavier, something he didn't have a name for. Naya stood beside him, the light catching the red paint smeared across her cheekbones, a mark of both mourning and defiance. She tied her mother's charm around her wrist. "They will reach us by noon," she said quietly. "If we run, they'll track us by nightfall." Colt's voice was low. "Then we don't run." She looked at him, startled, but he was already loading his rifle. They descended from a mesa and rode toward a dry riverbed framed by ancient cottonwoods. The land there was open but narrow enough to hold ground. Colt dismounted, scanning the terrain with the instinct of a man who'd survived too many gunfights. He found a ridge of rocks overlooking the bend, a perfect spot to make a stand. "We'll hold them here," he said. Naya shook her head. "You'll die here." He looked at her and gave a small, grim smile. "Then I'll make sure it's worth the dying." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she stepped closer and took his hand, a gesture that carried more weight than words ever could. "If you fall," she whispered, The spirits will carry your name." He nodded, his throat tight. "And yours," he said softly, "will be the last I remember." The sun climbed higher. The silence was unbearable, stretching thin until it snapped with the sound of distant hooves. The Apache riders appeared like mirages, silhouettes on horseback shimmering in the heat haze. Their war paint gleamed crimson. The first arrow struck the sand near Colt's boot, quivering in the dust. Then the world erupted. Gunfire cracked. Horses screamed. Arrows hissed through the air. Colt fired from the ridge, his shots echoing through the canyon. Each pull of the trigger was steady, precise, almost calm. He'd been born for moments like this, though he'd never wanted to be. Naya fought beside him, her bow flashing in the sun. Her movements were fluid, deadly beautiful. The battle turned into chaos, smoke rising, bullets tearing the air, men shouting in the Apache tongue. Colt felt the burn of a graze along his arm, but didn't stop. He reloaded, fired again, shouted over the roar. "They're flanking." Naya spun, loosing an arrow that dropped a rider mid-gallop. "Then we move," she cried. They dove behind a fallen tree as arrows thudded into the bark. Colt's lungs burned. Sweat mixed with blood on his face. He looked up. There were too many. They wouldn't last. His hand brushed the revolver at his hip, the last bullet waiting like a promise. Naya turned toward him, breathless, eyes fierce. "If this is where it ends," she started, but her words were drowned by the shriek of a war cry. The enemy charged again, their horses kicking up a storm of dust. Colt rose to meet them, rifle raised, eyes fixed. "Then let it end loud," he said. The sound that followed shook the canyon. Thunder of hooves, crash of gunfire, the cry of defiance that rose from two souls standing against the impossible. Smoke swallowed everything, and for a heartbeat, the desert itself seemed to hold its breath. Smoke drifted across the canyon like ghostly veils, and the echo of gunfire faded into the bones of the land. Colt crouched behind a boulder, chest heaving, his rifle empty. The air burned with the smell of gunpowder and blood. His ears rang. All around him, the world had gone still again, except for the moan of the wind and the faint crackle of brush fires spreading to the dry grass. He turned toward Naya. She was kneeling beside a fallen horse, an arrow in her shoulder, blood dark against her skin. Yet her eyes burned with that same wild fire that had haunted him since the river. "You're hit," he rasped, stumbling to her. "So are you," she said, nodding toward the dark stain on his side. Colt looked down, barely feeling the pain now. "Guess we're both running out of time." She smiled faintly, the corners of her mouth trembling. "Then let's make it count." A shout echoed from the canyon's rim. The last of the Apache riders, maybe 4, maybe 5, had regrouped. They descended slowly, circling like vultures. Colt helped Naya to her feet. The heat shimmered between them and the riders, turning everything into a blur of motion and light. He could feel his heartbeat slowing, his body heavy as stone. "You should go," he murmured. "They're your people." She shook her head, gripping her bow though her hands trembled. "Not anymore. My spirit chose." He wanted to argue, but there was no time. The riders raised their weapons, their horses snorting and stamping. The leader shouted something in Apache, a curse, maybe a warning. Naya answered in their tongue, her voice sharp and proud. Then she drew her bow, and Colt raised his revolver one last time. The final fight was short, savage, and silent except for the gunfire. Colt's revolver barked once, twice, each shot sure and deliberate. Naya's arrows sang through the air, striking true even as blood soaked her sleeve. Dust rose like smoke, and in that storm of golden red, the two of them stood like figures carved from fire. When the silence finally came again, it was complete. The last rider fell, his horse bolting into horizon. Colt dropped his gun, sinking to one knee. The desert tilted around him, and he caught himself against a rock, gasping. Naya stumbled toward him, her charm glinting at her wrist. "Colt," she whispered, her voice breaking. He smiled faintly, his breath shallow. "Looks like the spirits decided, huh?" She knelt beside him, cradling his face in her hands. "No," she said. "They chose both of us." The wind rose, soft and mournful, carrying sand across the battlefield. Colt looked past her to the sky, endless blue bleeding into crimson clouds. He thought of the river, the wolves, the fire, and the way her eyes had looked that first night, alive, unafraid. "Naya," he murmured, his voice fading. "You were right. I did belong to you." She leaned closer, her tears falling on his skin. "And I to you," she whispered. "Always." His eyes closed. The desert swallowed the last echo of his breath. For a moment, everything was still. Then the charm on her wrist flared faintly, its light flickering like a dying flame, before it dimmed forever, days later. When the wind had erased the tracks and the vultures had moved on, only the blood moon's memory lingered in the sand. Travelers passing through spoke of a place where the rocks burned red at sunset, and two shapes could be seen against the light, one standing tall, the other resting beside her, both eternal as the land itself. The story became a whisper, a legend of the man who saved the Apache girl, and was claimed by her heart and her spirits alike. The desert kept their secret, as it always did.